Remove carcinogens and get your gear compliant clean with Unimac laundry equipment. Find it at alliancelaundry.com/fire.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Beyond the Headlines with Chris and Angie. We're here and we're remote today. We have our special guest, Brandon Evans, and it's going to be a great episode for a couple reasons. First of all, Brandon's coming to us with some intense and very impactful stories about firefighters and mental health and asking for help. Now, the second part that's important that feeds into that is that we're remote. And this is not typically how we do it, but we're trying it today because I'm coming off a little bit of a stomach bug. Angie's got a little cold brewing. Now, the good part of that is that I'm going to cut her off a lot less over the course of the interview, which is feedback we've gotten, which is have Chris talk less and Angie talk more. So you guys are in for a treat today. I'm getting the bulk of my talking done now before we introduce Brandon. So Angie, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. A little tired, but we're doing it. So we're doing it.
Now, when we looked at Brandon's article, what's something that popped out at you? Now, it's on firefighternation.com, obviously. It's titled Firefighters and Mental Health, the Fear of Raising Your Hand. What's something that popped out at you? Because you suggested this article and I jumped on board pretty quick with it. What jumped out at you about this article you want to talk to Brandon about?
So what's interesting is that this article, he explains in there how it's not necessarily calls that we go on that are creating this mental health crisis sometimes, because we're firefighters and we're expected to take on the world's problems and then also our own. And so when we're having difficulty dealing with things at home, everyone kind of wants us to drop things at the door. However, that's a very hard thing to ask of people who have to spend 24 hours every third day of their life, sometimes getting mandatory and then dealing with a bunch of other types of emergencies. That's a big thing to ask of people. And this article spoke to me a lot just from personal experience, especially having my own experience where I took a personal day. And I'm someone who, some people say maybe I'm too honest, but when I had called and was told that I'm taking a personal day, I was asked why, which I said mental health. I just said, I need a mental health day. Yeah. And they were like, well, you can't do that. Sorry. And then put me on a sick day. Like, you can't, that's just no. And I have a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that this is still a problem. I have a very hard time understanding why this is still a problem with the amount of things that are out there, with how we get talked to about it when we go to different classes. This is like number one. There's a ton of different stuff. So I really, really would love to dive deeper into this article with him and seeing kind of maybe ways that we can change this or change the mentality or things that we can do to mitigate it.
I dig it. I think that's perfect. And I'm pretty sure he's going to talk about that, because just in the title alone, the fear of raising your hand implies that, like, you might be more hesitant now to take that next personal day.
Right.
Or you might have to fib about it, right? You might have to say you're sick when actually you're not. And no one wants to get into that whole can of worms. So let's get him in here. We'll talk to him. We'll get all the stories and we'll see what he says.
Yeah. Brandon, welcome. Like I said before, thank you so much for meeting with us. We're really excited to talk to you about all of this. Please, I'd love for you to, because the beginning of your article is very interesting on your background. So if you don't mind, I was kind of caught off guard with that, because I was like, whoa, this is way different than like your average person that you kind of interview for the fire service. So if you don't mind, could you kind of tell everybody a little bit about, that beginning part, maybe go a little bit deeper on that, the beginning part of your life and like how this all started for you and getting into the fire service?
Yeah, for sure. For me as a kid, my parents ran their own business, and my dad was in insurance, and it was definitely something that I didn't want to go into. And my childhood best friend, his dad was a firefighter, and he would always come home and have these awesome stories. He'd come home with bedhead, you know what I mean? And he was a happy-go-lucky guy. And I didn't realize it till later on in life. But when you start like evaluating, what am I going to do with the rest of my life?
Right.
You know, high school is coming to an end. My girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife, her father was also a platoon chief, and so they had these other influences in my life from the fire service. And I kind of started thinking like, wow, these two adults, they love their job and they're really happy about it. You know, I didn't thrive in academia at school. I loved working with my hands. And so for me, it was a no-brainer. Like, oh, I'll just go to fire college. I'll try to get into fire college and I'll go and I'll do that. It seems like an awesome job. These guys seem to love it. I like the adrenaline, the thrill, the rush, all those kinds of things. And so that's the path that I went down. Getting hired, there was a bit of a lull. So we don't just in Canada go throw applications in. You have to wait for a department to host a recruitment. And there weren't a lot of recruitments happening right after I got out of fire college. And so I applied to a few places. I live in Ontario. I applied to British Columbia. So I'm flying across the continents to apply at different places. And then this opportunity kind of came up to travel and go backpacking. And there weren't a lot of hirings happening. And so I just jumped on it. I had some friends that were doing it. I was curious about it. The year prior, I packed up my pickup truck. I drove out to British Columbia to try to get a job forest firefighting. I got hired with a contractor out there, spent a whole season doing that. And it kind of like, that was the first time really that I kind of got outside of my bubble of Southern Ontario. You know, I grew up as a kid just playing hockey and that's what we did. So picked up the truck, drove across the country. And it was pretty cool. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the fire side of things, obviously. And I enjoyed just the new experience of seeing new places and meeting new people and different culture, even though it's in the same country. And so I got a 1-year work visa to New Zealand. And I bought a plane ticket and I flew. I was doing construction when I wasn't, outside of the wildland season. So I built a bunch of houses, saved a bunch of money in like 4 months, and I flew down to New Zealand. New Zealand is an incredible place. And as a backpacker, it's really expensive. So, I spent most of my money in the first month. I got a job on a dairy farm milking cows where I was able to stack a bunch of money away. And I had a friend who was in Thailand. And so I went to go meet her. And that just kind of opened the doors. I spent the next year and a half just with like zero agenda, just kind of seeing what was going to happen tomorrow. I was by myself. I was always with people because you're always meeting people. But if, I was hanging out with some crew and things weren't going good, I was just see you later and I'm off. I'm on my own. It was the first time really where there was no real peer pressure from like a close friend, right? You grow up with, I had 3 brothers, your group of friends, you want to do this thing, you want to do that thing. I don't know. What do you think? It was just kind of like just me and a bunch of these strangers. And in that course of that year, I circumnavigated the world. I explored most of India, all through Southeast Asia. I went into Burma during a genocide. I crossed the Indian Ocean on a sailboat, went into the Middle East. The story starts with me getting off a bus in Sana'a in Yemen,
I was
and
like,
having this weird interaction. And so that's how I got to Yemen. It wasn't like, let me go check this out. I was just this naive, young 23-year-old backpacking around the world. And all of these things just kept presenting themselves. I didn't know what was going to happen tomorrow. I had zero agenda. And so, that's a brief little input into how I got to Yemen. You reflect on all these stories and experiences in your life, and there's these moments of like, holy shit, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Like, how am I gonna get out of this situation? I don't trust anybody here. I don't know how to trust anybody, but I have to trust somebody. So how do I do that? Who do I point to trust? Because any one of these people, they might not be the right person, or they might be. And I think I've had a lot of luck along the way. But there you go. That's a brief little intro onto how I kind of. So, anyways, I got through Yemen, came back home. There was a recruitment happening. And so I got back into the hiring process, and eventually I got hired.
So prior to getting hired, how would you describe your mental state? So do you feel that you had a pretty generally like good mental state at that time? I know like we all grow up in dysfunctions, like you're an anomaly if you don't. I mean, everyone comes from like something dysfunctional. So would you say that you were really good mentally, like mental health wise going into the fire service?
I think I was all right. Traveling on your own is a really interesting endeavor, right? And growing up, I got 3 brothers. You know, I fought most days of my life in some capacity,
For sure.
wrestling around, fist fight, whatever it might be. You know, I played hockey. You know, so all those things. So yeah, you know, I definitely fit into that category. You know, there was some dysfunction, and I have amazing parents that have a great relationship, and I now as a 40-year-old, you know, I watched the evolution of their relationship, raising 4 boys and the struggles that come along with that. So, you know, I do tell this story often. I was in Egypt after a year and a half of traveling all around the world. I'm like, I'm going to see the pyramids before I go home.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of the lowest times in my life. And, you know, I was just in a slump. I'm riding on the back of a camel around the pyramids in Cairo. You know, this is like bucket list stuff. And I'm just like, I could care less to be here right now. You know, like, this is cool. I'll take some pictures, do the thing, do the tourist thing. But I just want to go home. I just wanted to go home. My wife and I, we were together since we were really young, like 15. We spent 3 years separated, and then we got back after that time. She was off in the Philippines and teaching English in Taiwan, and lived in Australia. And so there was a 3-year gap where we were apart. And so there was a lot of heartbreak in that time for me when we were separated, and coming back together. So going into the fire service, I was also a young man, right? And so like the ego is pretty strong, and I was continuously doing things for my health. And I had this really unique experience when I was in northern India, where I was just like in the right place at the right time. I walked into a random restaurant in this little town, and this woman sat down next to me, and she said, "Hey, are you going to the teachings next week?" I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, the following week, I find myself sitting in a room for 3 days, listening to the Dalai Lama teach us lessons about life. And I had this experience. And so prior to getting into the fire service, there was a few years where I really started to dive into understanding more about how my mind works, about consciousness, not necessarily from a religious perspective, but I started studying a lot of Buddhism, because a lot of it is about like you as a person and how can you evolve and take shape and move forward. And me getting hired wasn't the easiest thing, right? I probably had 7 or 8 interviews with various fire departments, applied to all kinds of them. It wasn't just a one-time shot for me. And so there was a lot of up and downs with that. You're young, you're partying, a lot of alcohol was involved in the good times and the bad times as well. And so like, I think I was okay. It was like, I was super stoked and excited and thrilled when I got hired, and you're starting this job, and I got hired in my hometown, which was even like more amazing. So I was like, I was okay, but there was a lot of things that I didn't know I had to unpack yet.
Yeah. So
from the childhood.
That's an interesting point you bring up with going through kind of your evolution of spirituality and beliefs and self-discovery. Did you have a few friction points when you got hired? Because now you're entering into, you've had experiences that not a lot of people have had in the 18 months prior to getting hired. Jammed a lot in there. Did you have some rubs then that you come in, not with, I want to say a heightened enlightenment compared to the people around you, but you're coming from such a sideways angle compared to the other people who may have just been working at home, stayed local, been chipping away at these hiring tests. And now you walk in, this world traveler at the age of 24, who's listening to the Dalai Lama, like you're walking into the mosh pit here, the freak show. Did you have any kind of growing pains in that? Because you're walking into a structure where the older guys are supposed to be more mature, smarter leaders, and you might have lessons that they've never heard before because of your past 18 months.
I will say, when I returned home from traveling, it really, it was hard. It was extremely challenging. I'm coming back to the same place, same house party, same group of friends. You know what I mean? I was like, wow, I'm so different now. Like it just didn't feel right. And so when I got back from traveling, there was a couple of years until I got hired. I didn't just get hired right away. It was still a few years until I got hired. And I don't know. I think I was trained to be a good rookie, so I kept my mouth shut. I did my job. It takes a bit of time to start opening up, and it takes even more time. It did for me, anyways, to start opening your mouth when you know things aren't how they should be. When you see people doing things that are against the grain, or you just know are wrong, right? Like simple things like the way a fellow firefighter or medic is treating a civilian because you're running a tummy ache call. It's like, who cares if it's a tummy ache call? Like, why are you being a dick? Why are you screaming at them? Why are you yelling at them? Like, this is your job. You get paid to do this. Like, you know,
like you have a paycheck for this. Like, this is what's giving you your paycheck.
Yeah. There was a moment. So we go through classifications in my department, right? So it takes 3 years to become a first class firefighter. Every year you got to go through a classification kind of test. Then you get this kind of promotion thing, right? And so right before that happened, before I became a first class firefighter, I remember being on a scene. It was a car into a bus. And I got off the fire truck. Same time, 2 medics stepped out of an ambulance, and we were walking towards the scene together. And one of the medics turned to the other one and said, "Hey, did you grab the compassion?" And she turned around and she said, No, I left it in the truck. I don't think we're going to need it on this call.
Oh my gosh.
It was assumed that this was, that this person was drunk and ran into the car. And I remember hearing that and being like, that's fucked up. It's one of the times in my career where I was like, I wish I had said something. But I didn't. I was still a young firefighter, right? And it turned out that this person was a type 1 diabetic, and they were in a diabetic coma, and they weren't drunk at all. This was a serious medical event that was taking place. And so that moment really stuck with me, and it really helped me to speak up later. Even though I only had 3 years experience at the time, that really allowed me to start using my voice in ways that I hadn't used it before, both in the fire station and on scene, right? And it might be something subtle. I've never tried to be sometimes you come across as a bit of a dick, I guess, but something subtle, just like throwing the opposite out of what someone else said who was being really rude. Right? Just being like, hey, it's okay. We got you. We're here for you. And like placing a hand on someone's shoulder does a wealth of healing for that person in a really struggling time, you know, and or looking someone in the eye, like these little acts of kindness and compassion. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, but you did. So it's like this different aspect of mental health. So like mental health has I feel like as soon as people see mental health, they automatically think like suicidal ideation. They think like they automatically just kind of go to that one circle of it that people hear the most about, right? Because no one ever really talks about compassion fatigue or what's really going on when we have, mental health problems going on. So it's actually a good aspect of mental health to talk about, and recognizing when something might be going on because of the compassion fatigue you may be having or something. And it's always interesting to go what kind of comes first? Is our mental health becoming worse because we are lacking our compassion, and that's something we have to work on? Or is it the mental health is going down and now our compassion is lacking, and now it's like this whole other thing we have to, so it's like the chicken or the egg, like what kind of came first? But it's a good thing to talk about. And I myself have had, Chris knows the story. I was very upset because I got basically told that my raw emotion was unprofessional because I hugged a patient whose mom coded in the back. And she was, I know how to read a room. Like, I'm not going to go and touch somebody when I can tell that they're not like I feel like that awareness has to be there, obviously, before you do something like that. But I asked her, and I was upset, obviously, too, of what had happened. And it was the first patient that had coded on me. And so throughout this ride, I'm going through what ifs. Could I have, like talking to all the doctors and stuff, because obviously I always want to try to, take something back from that. Like, if I know that I'm going to get another call like this, what could I have done better, worse, whatever, which, that's a whole thing on itself. That call did affect me. It did affect me a lot just because of that situation. And so I was upset about it. And I went up to her and she was crying, and I was a little teary eyed, and I apologized profusely. And I said, I am so sorry. We did everything that we could in the back. They're taking life-saving measures right now, and they're doing everything they can right now for your mom. And I looked at her, I'm like, can I hug you? And she leaped forward. And that connection and that hug, because we both cried, and that did more for my mental health than I think people understand. Because if you allow yourself to feel these things, and you allow yourself to be that way towards other people and get on this humanity level, I feel like you won't see maybe as much mental health crisis issues, because I think that it all comes from us tucking everything away. We're not allowing us to feel these things. We're not allowing us to be upset with patients or show them that we're human. And then you have a leadership level that wants to tell somebody that they did something good for a patient, and not only the patient, it helps me, and tell me that I was unprofessional by showing any type of emotion. And so I'm not really sure what the answer is and how we can help departments understand that that's important. And it's probably not all departments, but the compassion aspect, I think, and knowing that we should be sitting with we should be having compassion, sitting with our feelings and not ignoring them and compartmentalizing them, no matter what the call is. It doesn't have to be, these huge traumatic calls, because it's all cumulative.
Well, I think
it's all cumulative. Yeah.
I'd like to bring that. Your story is perfect, Angie. And I think that's part of what Brandon went through, was a maturing, right? So at some point, Brandon, you went from thinking maybe man, that's messed up. They said that on that call about the compassion. And at some point, transitioned to that was messed up. And then you could see oh, that person's messed up. That's something that happens. So that's causing them to say that. And that maturation maybe doesn't happen for everybody. That might be the reason that some people might look at what Angie did and said, well, that's not appropriate. You can't do that, because the other side of that is just so scary, of showing that or not compartmentalizing or not dehumanizing that is so scary that let's just not do that. Let's stick to the book kind of thing.
Right.
What do you think, or can you think of what was the turning point, or what was the progression for you to get from that thing of man, that was messed up, to, oh, now I see that's a symptom of all this other stuff that's causing that person to say that. And now we need to start maybe addressing that stuff instead of just telling them you can't say that or don't do that. Instead of trying to police it, let's engineer a way to make it better.
Yeah. It takes time, I think is a thing. Right. And so, there was a lot of years where I just thought I was good, and it wasn't this conscious in the front of my mind where I'm not good, or maybe there's times that aren't good. But all of us, I don't care who you are, you come home from certain calls and you're like, wow, that one fucked me up. That was messed up. Yeah. And then you have this physical feeling outside of maybe the imaging in your mind that just doesn't go away, and it takes time. And we would have conversations on our crew oh yeah, it's been a week, that one's still there, and then the conversation would just kind of end. For me, everything erupted during a call, right? Or just after a call. And I came home and I was yelling, screaming, swearing, and I physically pushed my 4-year-old son to the ground. And I was like, fuck, I need help. My wife looked at me straight up. She's like, you need help. And I was like, you're right, I need help. And I had a decade of this fairly intensive exploration of self-help, diving into this world. And I still went over the waterfall because there wasn't this I don't know. I just hadn't unpacked these calls because I just thought that they were good. I thought I was okay. I thought I could deal with it and take it, right? Like, it would be like, no, don't go in there, new guy. I'll go in. You don't need to see it. I'll go do the thing. I'll go look at the body. I'll go take care of whatever needs to take care of. And so when that moment happened, it was in the middle of COVID. It was December of 2020. My part-time job as a firefighter at that time was owning and operating a CrossFit gym with my wife. We opened it just 18 months before COVID. Where I live in Canada, that gym was closed for 2 years. It was closed for longer than it was ever open. So there was this external family pressure, external business pressure, all of these stressors happening on top of being a first responder during COVID, where no one knew what the heck was happening anywhere. And, you know, I was trying to, on the business side, I was really trying to stand on a pedestal. Don't worry, everybody, all of our members at the gym, we'll get through it. Just one more lockdown, whatever it's going to be. But inside, it was just tearing me apart. And we responded to a call. It was a homicide. I was part of the team. We extracted the woman from the house fire. And I came home and I couldn't shake the image. I couldn't do anything. And then, you know, another lockdown happened. I'm on the phone, cancel memberships. My kid runs into the room, knocks something over, disrupts my life, and I just unleash on him. And then the next day, I called my therapist. I booked a neurolinguistic programming session. I booked a breathwork session, and that was a real eye opener for me to like, okay, right. And that those months, or those first 6 months, the first year of COVID, I think was kind of this turning point in general, where we really saw an evolution of mental health happening, where it was really bringing all of these things to the surface on so many different levels. And people started treating people differently than they ever have before because of one thing that we took way out of proportion. And we saw firefighters going off. One of my best friends at the time, my captain, he was off on a leave. And so you start seeing all of these things happening, and it's really easy to dive into negative conversation at the fire hall. This is a stupid memo. Why are we doing this kind of train? You know, this guy did this, she did that, blah, 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 blah. We get into these easy conversations, and I didn't like them, especially around this topic of vaccines in the fire hall and the continuous conversations that were happening around our own loved ones, our own crew members. And I didn't take to it. I would stop it. I would change the conversation. I would put a different perspective on it and try to play a neutral zone, not falling on one side of the coin or the other, not in favor for or against the vaccine, but like, what about the person? Because what was also happening, what happens in most fire stations, right, is you're back in the gym with someone exercising. You're out in the bay going through the truck checks. And when there's challenging times, someone's going through a divorce, COVID happens, you start talking about things that you might not have talked about before. And so I think COVID really helped people start to look at themselves differently. And then we all kind of, it came out different than it may have normally for each of us, because it was such a challenge for all of us. And so during that time, it kind of started to separate, but I think it really, for our crew anyways, it really helped to bond us tighter together. And it's like, it's an evolution. It's an up, and there's peaks and valleys where it was like, things aren't good right now, guys. Pull in the DC, the district chief, pull in everybody. We need to have an open conversation, because this is bullshit and we can't operate like this. And we had those conversations more than one time. And then we'd all have separate conversations in different areas, right? And like trying to move through this surface level bullshit that's happening to come together as a crew. There was, you know, 18,000 fucking memos and policies that came down the pipeline. We couldn't have ketchup and mustard on the kitchen table. That was a restriction of COVID. And so we had to agree with certain things and not certain things because of this. And you got to go through it and be willing to not just accept things, not just fight things, but actually find solutions. And this is the challenge we face with mental health in the fire service right now. We can fight it. We can say one thing on either side of the coin, but what are you actually doing, that's actually solving a problem. And so it was challenging, right? It's really hard to have hard conversations. It's hard to sit across the table from a senior firefighter and say, nope, you're wrong. I disagree with you. And then have a conversation, not a screaming match, but trying to have a conversation about that and mitigate those things. And so, yeah, for me, it was COVID personally. And then as a crew, right? Because I think as we look at mental health and healing, that is both an individual and a collective experience. It isn't one or the other. Both things need to happen. Participation needs to happen on both sides, and we need to be able to find communities where we feel safe in order to have those conversations. And safety, I in this space, I think comes through, you got to have some tough conversations because it's a hard thing to bring up. But what I would notice after we started pushing back and saying no, like we have to do this, we have to do that, and not creating the focus around one or two individuals who were making different decisions for their own families and their own lives than everybody else was, we got into the shit together, and we also got out of it together. And so it's just like a fire, right? Like you go in, you got to figure it out. You think you have a plan. The plan doesn't work. You got to pivot and switch things around, and that's uncomfortable. And then you find solutions at the end. And that whole crew is still together. I mean, I miss these guys dearly. They are my brothers, and it's been incredible to watch them, and the individual that replaced me when I left, he's no longer alive. He was diagnosed with some super crazy rare cancer. Within a year, he had passed. And from a distance, I got to witness my crew, because I'm still in the chat groups, right? I got to witness my crew be a part of that. And I think that the experience we shared as a crew moving through COVID really helped to bond them all together to deal with real shit that happened, right? Like COVID wasn't real shit. That was real shit. And they got to move through that together. And so, yeah, time is important. And that was my kind of eye opener. I had all these experiences of consciousness, of spirituality, trying to understand and be able to articulate those things. And I got to a comfortable place where I was open to sharing different experiences with my crew members about what was happening. And that comes in different levels and different waves. It's only in the last few years where I've become comfortable talking about me pushing my 4-year-old to the ground. That's not a comfortable thing to talk about. takes time. But what I did find was the more I shared those stories, like when we got back from that fire with that woman, in the next 4 days before our next shift, I had a therapy session, done a breathwork session, done a neurolinguistic programming session. I came back and I talked to them about that and shared it. And some of them thought that was a bit of a quack for some of the things that happened, experiencing love with this deceased woman and all these things. But they all kind of listened, and it led to more and more conversations over the next year or two back in the bay, back in the fire hall. A captain coming to me saying, "Hey, can I talk to you? I'm not a therapist. I'm not trying to be a therapist, but it was the openness of vulnerability that I had learned to experience that helped others do the same thing." And so it's like we share these really beautiful levels of wisdom as firefighters, right? Some senior firefighters do an incredible job sharing stories about how to fight fire, about what to do on scene, about what to expect, trying to prepare for some of these traumas, whether it's from a tactical perspective or from a mental perspective, right? Because we have this vast experience. It's why we say when you're a rookie, just shut up and listen, because you don't have that experience yet. And so the same thing happens on all fronts. Yeah. And so it's like, there was no intention behind it. I was just like, it helped me sharing my story helped me heal from it, because I wasn't tucking it away. I was being open with it. And I had some tools that I had learned in order to express myself, and it made me feel better. And what I noticed over the next 2 years was I was having conversations with every single person on my crew. they were having conversations with each other. Dudes were starting to stretch in the gym, do breath work, meditation.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, wow. It took me a while to like really see it all, but it's like, oh, like our actions, they rub off on people, because when we were also sitting around the kitchen table being like, why the fuck isn't he getting vaccinated? Bah, 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 bah. Everybody started to join in on that conversation.
Yeah. I think that's an important part.
Infectious.
You brought it up, was like separating. That was so difficult to do in the moment. We had the same conflicts. I mean, we have the city where I work is densely populated, a lot of multi-generational households.
Yeah.
And COVID hit us hard, man. We had, for the area we were in, we were like the epicenter of our suburb for COVID, and we got slammed. And for a lot of people, that brought up a lot of emotions, and myself included. And we got in the same shouting matches. And it's something that we brought up with Angie in our last episode of our other podcast, was that people don't mind the rules so much, but they'd stand two things: when the rules change and they weren't told about it, or when they feel like someone's getting away with something and you've been following the rules and this person gets away with something. Those two things will upset the apple cart every time. If you tell everybody the rules and the teams and you're all playing the game, then everybody's all good. As soon as you start changing rules and you feel like someone's getting an unfair shake, or getting out ahead of you because of a rule, that's when the rubs happen. But being able to separate the person from the problem is so tough, and it's so hard because there's so many emotions in it, right? You don't want to downplay what someone else is going through, or say that yours is so much more important and they should care like you do. But you gotta have something that can withstand that test of time and understand that this conflict will resolve eventually, but there's still going to be a person there on the other side you got to work with, or at least be around for the next 25 years. And it's tough. And even now it's tough. Like Angie and I have conversations with people, and they'll, like you said, time, right? Time puts it on the rearview mirror. Her and I both have some pretty lasting scars from COVID just because of the stuff we experienced in our department. And it's like that's why people have more than one kid. They forget how bad childbirth was. So they're like, it was no big deal. It was just a bump in the road and it lasted 6 months. You're like, it was like 4 years and it was terrible. What are you talking about? But, and we still have scars with relationships that last this day because of how stuff was handled. Right. So I think that's an incredible lesson. And that's the one that I wanted to latch onto from your story, was separating the person from the problem and seeing that they're more than this conflict that you're going through now. It's an incredible, incredible lesson. Let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now, because you've transitioned the past year or two, or a couple of years, to, like you said, telling your story and getting into the rough parts of your career and your separation from the department. Let's go into what you're doing now, how that kind of evolved, and talk about some of the lessons and stuff that you're teaching now.
Yeah. So you take all those experiences, right, came out of COVID, and I really started looking at the fire service to say, what have we done from a preventative perspective around our mental health? Are we trained in that? Like, what are we doing? And so I started just on my own to put together a mental fitness program. I took a look at my own life and a few members that I knew who had gone off and come back, and started to kind of like evaluate what tools were they using? Like, what allowed you to take the leap to go off, as well as bounce back into the fire station after a PTSD leave. And so pretty quickly into that endeavor, I was like, well, I need to learn more information. And so I had the framework and a whole bunch of development already created around Fire to Light for this program that I had put together. I had a really supportive deputy chief, had a meeting with him and our chief to say, hey, I'm building this program. Any support you have would be amazing. They were fairly supportive of what I was doing. And then I asked for I said, would you give me time off to go and do this thing? So I had just closed my gym. So that was a huge, massive decision I had to forego on a lease. I had this potential of me getting sued.
Yeah.
There was hundreds of thousands of dollars that were lost in that whole process. So the financial pressure was there. But I chose to let it go because I knew I was just fighting this thing. And so I made the decision. So I was granted this leave of absence. We took advantage of it. We sold our house to fund our year away. The housing market was great. We kind of knew we were ready to move out of that town anyways. And we just landed in Costa Rica and said, let's figure out life here and what we can do. And I'm going to really dive into this thing because I enjoyed it. I like what I'm doing. And so I dove into this research study, thought I'd hit a few chiefs in Canada, maybe a couple in the States if I was lucky. I ended up interviewing over 104 chiefs on 5 different continents all around the world. I've been in conversations with the head of almost all of the major national organizations in most of the Western countries or continents around the world. I saw a lot of success with the research early on, and the research was on the current state of mental health in the fire service. It was completely self-funded. I never went to university. I'm a firefighter. I just dove into this research to learn more, to really enhance the efficacy of fire to light, and to just understand like what are or aren't we doing in the service. We took that information and I plugged that into the program itself. And so I've created a entire mental fitness training system that can be plug and play for fire departments. We're trying to get that integrated into some fire departments right now. We've had some trials. We're working through some future potential trials as well. And we're really just trying to, do a few things. One is share the current state of mental health in the fire service and what we learned, because there is way more congruency with firefighters. Like, we experience the same things. Departments all around the world are experiencing the same things. And most departments are doing the same things. We have CISM teams, we have peer support teams. Only 17% of the departments we interviewed have a clinician or psychologist on staff. So this is a funding issue that some are looking to hire more, right? But over 86% of the departments that we interviewed have only trained 1 to 2 times in a firefighter's career in some form of mental health programming. So it really has just become a checkbox. On the most part, there are examples of departments who are doing incredible things. And I will say, as a whole, we're moving forward. We are improving in this space. There is a lot of incredible people at all levels who are doing incredible things around the space of mental health for firefighters. And so this is the work that I'm doing. I am trying to be a part of a movement where we can focus on preventative measures of mental health, not just reactionary measures. I found when I went over the waterfall, yelling, screaming, pushing my kid, when I got to the bottom of that waterfall, I had a toolbox. That there were tools that I've been practicing for over a decade. And so asking for help was really hard. I didn't want to do it. I was lucky to have support from my wife to say, you need help. Because she was right. I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to pick up the phone call the next day and go and get help. I didn't hit the bottle. I didn't let that maul for 10 or 20 years or even 3 months.
Yeah.
The reaction was fairly quick. And I was just curious, like, how many others have these tools? Are they practicing them? And like, how are they being, like, I didn't gain these things from the fire hall. They all came from outside of the service, just from my own unique experiences in life. And there are some preventative things. Most preventative measures that fire departments are doing is ensuring that your peer support team and your CISM team are in place so that they can react in an appropriate manner. That's amazing. We need those things in place for sure. But when we looked at like, how are we teaching tools of, we call it mental fitness, right? You mentioned it earlier. The weight that the word mental health carries and the connotation that it has is, I wouldn't say it's one that's positive. It carries this negative connotation, right? Like all these movies from both of our childhoods or from all of our childhoods, right? You look at like Ace Ventura. He goes to a mental institution, right? Like that's what used to happen. And so this is still alive in our thought process, in our consciousness somewhere. And there's all these great fears around like, oh, well, that means there's something wrong with me. When the reality is like, no, like you're just a human. And you're a human who does a really, really unique job that most people never experience. This past summer, we were in Canada. We were driving through the country and we came across a car accident. I got out of the car. There was another off-duty medic who happened to have a defibrillator with him, and he was already conducting CPR. I jumped in. I helped, start doing CPR in the middle of the road. Ambulance shows up pretty quickly, and I left the scene. My family was in the car, intentionally parked far enough away, put my kids in front of their screens so they didn't see anything. And I came back to my car and my wife was crying. She's like, "Oh my God." She's like, "Is he okay?" I'm like, "No." He's like, he's not going to make it. And she was really upset. And that was the first time she has ever witnessed something like that. Done CPR well over 100 times in my life, if not more, hundreds, right? Like it just becomes this routine thing that we just do all the time, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't affect us. I remember my very first call was CPR. Yeah. It was VSA. That was my very first call ever. And it was like, oh my God, you're breaking ribs. You're doing the thing. And I still remember the feeling coming home after that for a few days being like, oh my God, I guess this is what I signed up for.
Yeah, right? We were just talking about the other day of like how aspects of yourself, and this is going to be, I'm glad you said that because Angie, this ties into the episode topic that you were thinking of for other shows, aspects of yourself that you didn't realize changed over the course of your career. And there's a very good chance that if your wife was the first responder and she went and did that, you'd be distraught over it too, because that's just not your wheelhouse, right? Now, I will say I've been a part of a funny scenario where I was at a wedding. They had a charter bus to take us to the venue, and there was a massive car accident in front of us, and myself and a nurse got off the bus, and it was gross. There was an arm hanging off, and there was this and that, but it was nothing life-threatening. And but we were in more of a rural area, so it was going to take a while, and the road was blocked. And I got back on the bus, and the pastor was like, is that person okay? I said, that person's in pretty rough shape, but they'll be okay. Like, they're going to need some surgery, but they'll be all right. And he was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to start saying a prayer for her and the children in the car. I'm like, they're okay. He's like, it's just so terrible. Now, the mother of the groom who was paying for everything, all she wanted to know was like, do you think we can get around the accident? Because we got to get to the venue. And I was like, you're my girl. I'm like, let's get this thing going, man. Let's start directing traffic, getting people moving. I'm like, you're in the wrong profession, lady. Let's get going. She's like, caterers are going to be there 5 minutes. I was like, all right, I get it, Kath. Let's go. So yeah, it's wild the way we pop into action, how people respond to that. What's the reception been since you've been going out and speaking? What's the reception been from chiefs, from departments, I've been to some larger speaking venues now. Specifically, and I told you this before, I love to hear the success stories, people high-fiving you saying, yes, we need this. But have you gotten any rub? Have you gotten any conflict or pushback or like, hey, we already got peer support, we don't need your stuff? What have those interactions been like?
Yeah, so it's been really eye-opening. My research was on chiefs and leaders. I was never a chief. I was never a captain. I was always a firefighter. And so it has really opened my eyes because I did have a perception of some chiefs. I had some amazing chiefs throughout my career, and I had some other ones who weren't amazing. And going to these conferences, there's a lot of incredible leaders out there. And I think most of their hearts are actually in the right place. A lot of the disruption happens because there's this multitude of levels, right? Even going from the chief to whoever's in charge of behavioral health or wellness to unions, to council. There's so many layers that impact a chief's decision that might be unaware to the average firefighter, someone who hasn't sat in or around that position. There's so many layers and so many restrictions. A lot of them want to do more. They don't know how, or because of union administration relations, some chiefs fight it and other ones have just completely stepped back all the way. And so they just say, just do whatever you want to do. And so some of them have amazing programs that are already in place. Most people are extremely supportive of the work that I'm doing. I get the praise, good job, all this stuff. There's been very few who have jumped on board to start with it. Now, part of this is the snail's race of the fire service. They may already be participating in something. Mental health is a challenging thing, and when you add preventive in the perspective that we are trying to approach prevention with, there hasn't been a lot around it, and so it's viewed in a manner of it's just another mental health program when it's actually a very tactical, operational system of training that we've designed to help firefighters on a daily basis, help to build tools in the same way that we pull hoses and ladders off of a truck. We train on our tools. We check our SCBAs. We check our fire gear. How are you checking up here on a daily basis and creating those tools? And so part of it is helping to shift the perspective. I also have to battle, I don't know if that's the right word, with department clinicians and psychologists. And so there is a clinical perception. We're not trying to be clinicians or therapists. We're just trying to say, hey, there's all kinds of tools that we can use, like learn how to use your breath, tactical breathing from a number of different modalities within what you're already doing. And so part of it, I think, is I wrote about it in my paper, this lack of understanding and acceptance of mental health. Like chiefs and leaders, there's this expectation now that you should be a mental health expert because of the nature of our job, because as a society, we've grown into this space of awareness. When I sat down with Dr. Lori Marella, so your US or your past fire administrator, one of the comments that she made was, as a service, we're stuck in awareness. And we haven't quite figured out, especially on a whole, how do we move into the operational phase of mental health? And what does that look like? And what does it mean? Because just going to a clinician to get diagnosed with PTSD, that's not operational, right? It's a reaction to experiences and events that have happened. And so when I looked at all other areas of firefighting that we excel at, fire suppression, training in firefighters skills, fire prevention, fires still happen, but we do a great job at actually preventing fires, right? Prevention comes into play in a big capacity. We look at firefighter safety. So this is a really interesting one. We do a great job. Firefighters do not go into a house fire anymore without putting an SCBA mask on, right? Your self-contained breathing apparatus. You don't go in there with your bunker coat open up. We don't do that anymore. That happened not that long ago, 20, 30 years ago. My father-in-law tells me stories. His first captains refused to wear an SCBA because they couldn't smell the smoke. They couldn't feel the heat. So therefore they couldn't read the fire. And then he mentioned none of them lived past 65 years old. So our awareness of physical safety has got to a point where we value it, right? I honestly don't think that we're there yet when it comes to psychological safety. Because all we're doing is a reactionary side of things. That's all we're doing. We haven't put a lot of extreme measures in place on the preventative side. The proof is 86% have only trained up to 2 times maximum within a career. And so you sit down for a 1 to 3 hour mental health program in session, you get pulled off a truck, you go into the classroom. And they're all fantastic. These are great programs, great things that we're doing to help raise awareness. They're part of the puzzle. But then what happens afterwards? The story is the same time and time again, where it's like, yeah, there was no follow-up, or it wasn't consistency with it. We don't know how to be consistent with it. Or there's refusal from the floor to do things like this. Or we got some free program and we gave it to them and they didn't take it up. But the role models aren't there if we're not holding each other accountable. And so what I'm finding recently, since I've been touring around, trying to sell this thing and speaking on the work that we're doing with Fire to Light, there's a lot of conversation in the mental health space around, do we make these things mandatory? Do we make it voluntary? And so I've had some healthy pushback with that conversation where departments have tried mandatory, doesn't work. So the voluntary thing seemed to work better for them. The difference between some of these departments and most departments is that there's consistent action. This is the key that's missing in any kind of mental health associated with firefighters, is consistency. And so if we can be consistent at debriefing after rough calls, awesome, great. And there's, some people love it, some people hate it. There's a way in which to go about that. Then why can't we be consistent at talking about how to improve our lives? How to breathe tactically, how to be more mindful on scenes, how to be aware of compassion fatigue, how to become more compassionate, all of these things. And so from the preventative perspective, if we're not being consistent with it, well, it's just going to go by the wayside. And this is a fault of the service at large. You get a new memo or a new chief comes into play and they don't like that there's too much overtime and too many sick days are happening. And so we're going to create a new attendance management program and we're going to hammer down on you for the next 6 months. And they do. And then after those 6 months, it kind of like fizzles out and no one cares anymore because some new things come up to the table and it's taken priority. And so we all sit there as firefighters and be like, well, if you don't actually give a shit, we know the system, we know the routine, we're just going to continue to play the game. And like, maybe those sick days are needed. Maybe we need to take that time off. And so I wouldn't say there's been a lot of pushback. There's been a lot of support, and there's also a lot of maybe a lot of excuses of, well, we're already doing something, we'll put it in the budget for next year. The biggest thing that comes up is we don't have enough money for this because there's zero budget line for wellness. And the other thing is that it falls into too many hands. This is the biggest challenge with organizations like mine. It goes from this person to that person to the other person to some other person to the next person. And by the time it gets to somebody, they don't even know what the heck's been going on through all these other conversations. And so the accountability gets lost in the process. And I think this is a flaw of a lot of departments there. There's too many levels, and we don't hold enough accountability. When we value it, we hold the accountability, right? So if you get a new electric fire truck, or you're running hydraulic tools on your extrication truck, and then you get battery operated ones, there's a real good chance that your department makes it mandatory that anyone who's going to use those tools trains on those tools before it goes into service. That's what we did. And so when we care about it, we prioritize it and we ensure that it happens. And when we don't know how to do that, so if you have a leader who doesn't know how to get in touch with their own vulnerabilities, who isn't being vulnerable, who doesn't understand the stuff in a depth that others do, then they may not be taking action on it. And when you have leaders that have gone through the healing process, not just the shit, right? Over 77% of the leaders that we interviewed personally know another firefighter who's died by suicide. Like, we all experience really heavy stuff in our career, personally and out in the field. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're all taking incredible strides of action to do something about it. So there's this unknowingness around, what do we do? What does prevention look like? Because of these fears of putting our hands up for ourselves and being like, do I need to check in? Am I okay? The ego comes into play and is just like, I'll muscle through it because this is what our role models have done in the past, right? And so we are improving. We are getting better. We are doing amazing things. And there is so much more that we can be doing that we're physically not doing. And so I think a lot of times it becomes an easy excuse to be like, we tried something in the past. We don't even know how it worked, because how do you measure the lives you've saved?
Yeah.
How do you measure the lives you've saved, right? And so that becomes a bit of a challenge. But anyways, there's answering your question. You know, I've gained a lot of respect for leadership, and even going back to crews and firefighters who I know and love being like, well, yeah, well, what are those assholes saying when you go to these conferences? I'm like, dude, they're trying, man. Like, a lot of them are trying. It's just understand the restrictions that are on them. And then there's so many layers of chiefs, right? You've got district chiefs, battalion chiefs, platoon chiefs, deputy chiefs. There's a large department. You have so many people and so many different personalities and so many different, this chief expects that chief to just do their job. They don't want to micromanage them. But if that guy's an asshole and isn't going to push anything forward, then, you know, you're kind of screwed in a sense. So,
Angie, you got one more
Question?
Yeah.
I do. So my question is that sometimes I hear people tell people that you're going to get screwed up in this no matter what. Or you came into this because you're screwed up and now this is going to screw you up more. I'm wondering, do you feel that we're all screwed up coming into this? Or do you think that this is all going to screw us up? Or do you feel that if we put preventative measures in place, if we have the right tools in the first place, that this job doesn't have to screw us up?
That's a great question. I think that we're all human. And I think that what we aren't taught as most humans is that there is an element of suffering that is a part of life. And at times the amount of suffering can become great. And at other times we may not be suffering at all. And what I don't think most of us are taught is how to perceive the suffering as that it's a part of our journey and it's a part of who we are. You know, not everyone is a first responder or a firefighter. I had zero desire to be an accountant, but somebody else did. And so for whatever reason in my life, in your life, we find ourselves in this place of service, in this modality, in this profession of becoming a firefighter. And so it's probably not a fair statement to say this job is going to mess you up even more. And like, I think it's hard to overlook it. Like, the reality is, so here's a statistic that we learned, right? As a first responder, you're going to experience somewhere between maybe 100 and maybe 1,000 traumatic events within your career. The average person in the general population only experiences between 3 to 4 traumatic events in their lifetime. So what that means is that you'll experience somewhere between a couple thousand to potentially over 25,000% more trauma than the average person. So we know this as first responders that we're going to experience more. It's hard to predict how that is going to impact us. So to walk into this profession to assume that you can take it and you can muscle it and it's not going to affect you, well, it's pretty naive.
Yeah. I guess
it's pretty naive.
I guess what could you tell people who maybe had the new guy or girl coming in onto the I don't ever want to sit there and, because I feel like if you're going to be like, you're going to get screwed up, like, don't tell someone who's just coming into this, it has like this passion, like, don't tell them that. Like, what is a good way to approach this with new people, so that maybe over time, because there still is a stigma and there's still that pushback, people who go, if you need mental help for this, then this job wasn't meant for you in the first place, or whatever the case may be, because there's still those people, but those people will eventually trickle out. And so how do we, and what do we say to these new people coming in so that we're not just gonna, like, they're not already in their head, like, well, I'm going to get screwed up anyway, so full send on this job. So like, you don't want to do that to people. So what's an appropriate way or thing to say or do or show these newer firefighters?
It's twofold, right? Like, we need to take action and show new firefighters how to take care of their mental health. And these aren't necessarily like things offside the hall. This isn't like kumbaya sitting around the kitchen table talking about your deepest, darkest childhood traumas. That's not what we're talking about. That stuff is reserved for therapy. Mm-hmm. How are you connecting your mental health to the job? Are you saying, hey, I need to take a mental break. I'm going to go to the gym. Talking to those rookies about, no, you need to go and exercise regardless of how the culture in that fire station has treated. I didn't work out for the first 12 months of my career because this fear of being the new guy, not wanting to take advantage of that. Yeah. That was a no-no, right? Like, someone should have been telling me to get my ass in there to exercise because of the importance it has for my mental and emotional states of being. Making it okay for those rookies to say, hey man, that was a rough call. Like, it's okay if you need to take your next day off. Right? And talking about sleep, making sure they go to sleep.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That's like one of my biggest things. And actually, this is funny because this is totally going to be for our next episode when we have this, because my coworker and I were talking about this. It is insane to me. We send people to like fire academy. We send them to all this stuff. And we talk about, this is what you need to do for your mental health and your physical health, which mental health is physical health. Like that all ties in together. And we talk about how it's like, always get enough sleep, make sure that you're eating right, make sure that you're doing all this stuff. And then we throw them in these firehouses and it's like, you're the new guy. You have to be up at 5 a.m. I don't care if you went to bed at, you got back from a call at 3, but you have to be up in 2 hours so that you get the coffee on for us, or that you do this. You have to be the first to be up, last to go to sleep. You got to do this. And it's like, we're instilling horrible things for these people. We're wrecking their mental health. Like, we are wrecking these people. They are us. They're just new.
Or we're giving ample opportunities for the crew to show good leadership, right?
Right. I'm like, I always tell it's so funny because we'll be like sitting and there's like, because I have a combination department. So like we have part-timers and then full-timers. But our part-timers, they do the same job. They're here every third day. They just don't pay into the union. They are not different. They do the same thing.
Right.
And they're afraid to sit on a recliner. And I'm like, get in here. Like, come sit. Come relax. You are still doing the same. Like, you are us. Come sit. And then they're all worried about getting up in the morning and stuff. And my other coworker too is like, it takes 5 minutes to get the paper, to put the dishes away and whatever. Like, stop getting up an hour and a half so that we can all stare at each other at a kitchen table or stare at each other's phones. Like, your sleep is more important. Like, I just wish I still, this is like just one of those things where it was like, when I came into the fire service, I was just like, this is just how it is. And like that acceptance, this is how it is. But it's like, no, this needs to change. Like, this can't be like this.
Well, it takes a great leader to know the exceptions of the rules, right? Like in departments I worked in, there's always been those rules. But there's always, the leaders that I respected the most have also been like, I know that's the rule, but here's what the purpose of it is. Like, we want you to accomplish this thing. So the way it's typically done is you get up at 5 and accomplish those things. But let's be honest. If you get up at 5:50 and accomplish those things, that's what we're going for. We just want you to do those things. So they've broken down some of the archaic rules around those things to make sure the objective's still completed. But so it conforms in a non-conforming way. But that takes the person like Brandon's talking about to say, like, maybe you don't have, like Angie, maybe you don't have the ability to call in sick when you need a mental health day. But it takes a real leader to say, I know you need a mental health day. I know we don't have those, but I understand if you're sick next day because that falls within your needs and what's going to help the department forward. And if that's a problem, I'll have the conversation above you when you get in trouble for that. But I understand your needs and we're going to make the system work for us in some cases. And it's not always going to work out in our favor. You're going to get pinched once in a while, but those are the leaders that are going to actually make a difference and support you and push the department forward. Because maybe you do that enough times where 5 years from now, the new leadership comes through and says, we don't have to do workarounds all the time. Maybe we can change this to actually benefit our people instead of having to scab this together. Now we can make appreciable change, right? Where if he just shuts you down every time and you suffer in silence every time, now 5 years later, there's no reason to change the system because Angie hasn't had a problem in 5 years. So it takes that bridging of common sense with tradition and all that junk in the middle and a good leadership personality to make this thing pull forward. I think that's what Brandon's hoping the world is full of. And I hope we get more of them too, man.
There's enough of them. And I do believe that they're growing because it's infectious. Yeah. Right. When one person's, if you're feeling that way and thinking that way, chances are somebody else is too. It's just like, what position have you put yourself in? Even as a senior firefighter, even if you've been on for 5 years, don't even have to be on for 15. Yeah. To stand up and say something, because that's the hard thing to do. The hard thing to do is go against the grain, even when you know that the grain is broken and the grain ain't working. And that's the tough thing to do. And so that's how cultures shift. It's not through the big old things. It's through the tiny little things and how we do stuff. So action is probably more valuable than words. You don't have to tell the rookie, I'm going to do this for you. You just say, hey, man, I'm going to get up and I'm going to make the coffee in the morning and make sure you get your sleep. You've been up late the last 3 nights, whatever it was. Yeah. And most young firefighters, they also have young children at home.
Right.
Yes.
Right. They're not getting rest when they go home.
I know. Yes.
Yeah.
And so you don't sleep on the couch. I'll nap on the day because I've been on for 20 years. Yeah. My kids are grown. They're in university. Yeah, right. I got nothing to do when I go home, but I'll take the nap because I deserve it and you don't. Right. And so those kinds of things probably need to change. And then, shifting the conversation. Yeah. Say, hey, did you get in the gym today? No, go in the gym.
So approaching.
Why? Because that's your job. Get to the gym because that's your job. Do it for this, not for that. Hey, why don't you come meditate with me? Why don't you come do some stretching with me? Why? Because these challenges that I've experienced, these calls in the job that I've been telling you about, because it's an integral part. And this helps me cope with those. Yeah. This helps me cope with the shit that we have to see, deal with, feel, imagine, all of that stuff. I don't think there's enough conversation about that. This isn't like, again, we're not talking about deep, dark childhood secrets. Yeah. We're talking about how do we cope? Because you may be on a crew where every Thursday you're going to the bar and get liquored up, because that's how we cope.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I don't miss
nothing wrong with having a few, nothing wrong with having a good party. And this is a entrenched tradition that we have in the service of throwing them back, because it's an easier way to cope.
Yeah.
So ensuring that there's healthy things there. And just, we gotta show them.
Yep.
That's all.
I dig it, man. I love it. Angie, why don't you close us out? I think that was pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brandon. We enjoyed talking to you. Loved your article. I think that this is a really good way to kind of reach out to people. And I hope your stuff is, do you come to the US with your preventative program?
Yeah, I'm talking with departments all over the world.
Okay,
Canada,
great.
US,
That's cool, because I think that would
New
be
Zealand,
something that a lot of people would be interested in, because I really love the kind of like your mental training program. Like, I love that. And I think that's such a great thing.
A recent article too. This was put up on Firefighter Nation on March 6th. So you don't have to go back very far to find it. And when's the next time you're going to be presenting it at a larger venue where people can come see you, Brandon?
I'm not sure right now. I got some things in a few different places internationally right now. So we'll see. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, in Colorado in October. So we'll see how that one.
All right. So it's called Fire to Light. Where can people go to look at this, to kind of check out your stuff?
You can connect with us directly through our website, firetolight.org. You can hit us up at firetolight_firefighters on Instagram. That's probably the easiest. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, Brandon R. Evans, and Fire to Light's on Instagram, on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome.
Fire to Light. So there you go.
Awesome.
And if you're looking for his article on Firefighter Nation, you'll pick it out immediately. If you click on it, the first thing you'll see is a picture of a young man riding a donkey with some motor oil strapped around his neck, appearing to almost be loading a bus or getting on a bus, but he's walking in front of it. So it's an eye-catching photo. It's a great story. And man, thank you so much for giving us your time and kind of explaining it a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was
wonderful to share. Thanks for having me.
Remove carcinogens and get your gear compliant clean with Unimac laundry equipment. Find it at alliancelaundry.com/fire.